Last episode, we explored the most likely theories regarding the origins of the first factions in ClanHub. In this episode, tensions rise between these first factions amid a space race. Would they be able to put their differences aside? Or would these tensions boil over into full-blown conflict? It was early 2018. The first 3 space programs had been formed and began to develop their first suborbital spacecraft. The tensions between them would always be present, even from their first days due to their ideological differences, with the capitalist ASP in the west, communist SSP in the north, and the National Socialists in the east under the NSSP. The details about this period are difficult to discern due to a lack of verifiable information, but we can assume that within the NSSP, the internal tensions were high due to the oppression of the native tribes living under the rule of Germanic colonists. And although the details are impossible to discern, we know that the NSSP would fall sometime before February 2018, either from internal pressure from the populace, external pressure from the other 2 powers, or both. Whatever the case was, their territory was retaken by the native tribes that inhabited the area. The colonists that remained formed the NWSP as a successor to the NSSP, and most of those involved fled into ASP, which the NWSP would eventually merge into. Although suborbital spaceflight had been achieved by all major powers, orbital flight was just beginning, and in early to mid-February 2018, the 2 major powers developed their first orbital spacecraft. As the opposing countries improved their technology, a Cold War began between the 2 due to their opposing ideologies. Both sides wanted to be the one to spread their ideology far and wide, and prove their superiority over the other. As tensions rose throughout February, both sides began rapidly militarizing, anticipating a potential conflict between them in the near future. This began the first major development in the field of armored vehicles and other weapons systems. For example, on the 25th of February, the Supreme Leader of the SSP ordered the development of the first ever nuclear missiles, which could reach any part of the world, clearly to combat the ASP, who also began developing nuclear weapons, but at a much slower pace. Within the SSP weapons program, those who worked on the nuclear weapons would receive awards for their service, highlighting the importance of their task. A variety of nuclear weapons were made with the capability to strike long-range targets across the world. But along with nuclear missiles, the first orbital weapons were developed by the SSP, with the ASP following closely behind. Both sides were ready for a devastating conflict against each other, and it seemed like the slightest thing could set the world ablaze at any moment. As tensions rose between the ASP and SSP, the SSP began purges of suspected capitalist sympathizers across the continent, imprisoning thousands due to worries that they had been infiltrated by ASP spies. While the Cold War intensified, so did the space race between the 2 superpowers. Both sides wanted the prestige of being the first to land on the moon, with many in both nations working tirelessly to create the first spacecraft capable of landing on the moon. By March 1st, 2018, after several design variations, the SSP beat ASP to the moon, successfully landing 2 cosmonauts on the moon and safely returning them to Earth. Those involved in the mission and the design of the rockets were given promotions, showing that the space race was at the height of importance for the SSP. But the space race wasn't over, and both sides geared up to continue, with their sights set on Mars. Despite the fact the ASP also made it to the moon shortly after, they saw the SSP start to pull ahead of them in terms of technology, and decided that rather than pursuing Mars, they would focus on their operations on the moon for now. In the meantime, the arms race between the 2 powers continued. On the 4th of March, SSP began work on orbital railguns, with the intention of being able to destroy the ASP's extensive bunker complexes. Weapons development continued at a high pace, with the first heavy tanks and other similar armoured vehicles being developed by SSP. At the same time, SSP began setting up a moon base, but, feeling their own plans being threatened, the ASP threatens to attack the base, and war seemed imminent. But Alex Proton, the leader of ASP, reconsidered her actions and backed off, instead deciding to simply build their own moon base on the 6th of March. The period of constant advancement in space exploration technology continued, as both sides compete with each other. SSP leadership noted that ASP's space weapons had become superior to their own, despite the recent advancements. But despite them falling behind in weapons development, they continued to pull ahead of ASP in terms of space exploration technology, as on the 9th of March, they announced they're beginning work on a Mars rover, becoming the first faction to send an object to the planet. Additionally, on the 18th of March, they began working on a new space station orbiting the Earth. As the high tension between the superpowers continued, and the SSP leadership remained rife with paranoia, they began to work on a prison on the moon to send political prisoners on the 24th of March, demonstrating the political repression taking place within the SSP and the general atmosphere of paranoia within the nation about anyone that could be tied to the ASP. In late March, as the arms race continued, a high-ranking ASP scientist defected to the SSP and revealed that the ASP had been developing high-tech ICBMs and other systems. Following the defection, the ASP was on high alert, with their leadership concerned about what details the defector could have revealed to the SSP. After the information from the defector was received by SSP at the start of April, the SSP ramped up their ICBM construction after a special order was made by the Supreme Leader. Their new ICBMs were specifically designed to be able to strike anywhere in the world, and SSP leadership states they need to be prepared to use these weapons. Once again, it seemed like both sides were poised to strike each other at any moment. At this point, the SSP was essentially mobilized and ready for war, halting all space progress to direct all funding to their warfighting capabilities. While the two superpowers engaged in a cold war with each other, the first minor powers began to form in other parts of the world, and started to align themselves with the superpowers. For example, the RSF was formed in late March. They were a small, space-based military force, aligned with the ASP, forming an alliance with them on March 31st. Other small factions were formed in a similar manner, however their names and alignment remain lost to time. There are, however, a few outliers, such as Coalition Alpha Beta, or CAB, which was formed in early April after the unification of the Alpha and Beta Islands, as well as Emerald Island. Much like the other powers, it was formed under the banner of technological advancement. However, CAB had more of a focus on general development of advanced technology rather than specifically space exploration. CAB had a neutral stance on the world powers, with a slight bias towards the SSP. Another emerging power was known as Her Majesty's Space Program, or HMSP, where the island united under a monarchy to compete with the other space programs. Much like CAB, they were a neutral power, opposed to either side expanding their influence too much. And while CAB was slightly biased in favour of the SSP, the HMSP had a slight bias against the SSP, due to their ideological differences and a close proximity to the communist giant. The last of the minor powers that stood out was the fledgling nation of Arstotzka, which had previously undergone a communist revolution. The nation had recently come under the leadership of its new dictator, Joseph Romanov. Under his rule, the country had defeated its historic rival Kolechia and unified their entire island under Arstotzka on the 10th of April 2018, officially declaring the formation of the Arstotzkan space program. with the young dictator hoping to follow in the footsteps of the SSP. Joseph Romanov was well liked among the Arstotzka populace, being seen as a fair but harsh ruler and a man of the people. After unification, Arstotzka started expanding its industries, developing weapons and space exploration technology, which quickly reached a similar level to the other powers. The nation was brought to a new level of prosperity with its new advancements in technology, but not all saw Romanov as their savior. The Kalechian populace, which still comprised a large portion of the island's population, including around half of the nation's capital, saw him as nothing more than a ruthless dictator and a foreign occupier. The resistance of the Kalechians would prove to be a thorn in the young dictator's side, but for now he was optimistic and hoped for a peaceful reign over the island. He even stated to some of his top officials that he wasn't interested in getting involved in any major conflicts, hoping to focus purely on matters within Arstotzka itself. In the meantime, the superpowers took a surprising move to eliminate the tension between them. On the 12th of April, both sides decided to hold a vote between them on forming an alliance, to put their differences aside to further the advancement of humanity, as well as to end the looming threat of nuclear war. The vote was highly polarizing, with there being good arguments on both sides. Some arguments for the alliance were that it would ease tensions, lessening the risk of a nuclear war, which would be devastating for both sides. It also allowed both sides to stop focusing on the arms race against each other, and focus on helping the advancement of humanity as a whole. This would make it so that they were able to cooperate with each other in scientific development and space exploration, as one combined effort. However, there were compelling arguments against the alliance. For example, such an alliance could reduce the autonomy of either side, and make them more dependent on the other. Additionally, some people felt that collaborating with their ideological enemies was a poor move, and that they would only be helping their rivals gain an upper hand against them. Within the ASP, a majority of people were in favour of the alliance. Most people didn't have too much ill will towards the people of the SSP, and agreed that an alliance would benefit humanity and ease tensions. However, the proposal was much more controversial within the SSP, and even though there were many who were in favour, there was a significant portion of the population who were vehemently against such an idea, believing they shouldn't collaborate with their enemies, the ASP. Despite the fact that only a minority of people in SSP were against it, most those who would vote in favour didn't have much of an opinion on the matter, as opposed to their very vocal opposition. As for other powers, most were neutral, with CAB and RSF being against the alliance, seeing it as a threat to them, and not wanting their allies to become closer to the other side. But the most important faction in opposition was the HMSP, who saw the strengthening of ties between ASP and SSP as a threat. In their view, if the two of them were united, the SSP would be emboldened to expand communist influence against the HMSP and other surrounding areas. And with one major alliance to dominate the world, no other power would be able to oppose them. It was in their best interest that this proposal would not become a reality. As the 12th of April came to a close, the results of the vote came in. The ASP largely voted in favour of the alliance, with around 75% of people voting in favour. Meanwhile, in the SSP, the results were close, with several high-ranking figures in the SSP encouraging people to vote against on the day of the vote. However, when the results finally came in that night, around 55% voted in favour and 45% against. With the vote concluded, the alliance was formed between the SSP and ASP, to the dismay of those who opposed it and felt betrayed by the leadership of the SSP. The next day, the Supreme Leader of the SSP made a statement in a speech to the nation, following the formation of the alliance, which went as follows. Due to the popular vote, We shall form an alliance and stop all aggression between the SSP and ASP. As long as everyone respects the pact, everything will be fine, and we will all live a long and prosperous life. Thank you for ending this Cold War and starting a new era. But this did little to placate those that felt betrayed by the actions of their leadership, and what was originally meant to alleviate tensions would soon have deadly consequences for all involved. Later, on the 13th of April, one of the vocal high-ranking figures in the SSP that had been against the alliance gathered up a group of loyalist officers and made a statement to the nation, announcing the formation of what he called the People's Revolutionary Space Program, an organization to take the place of the SSP and end the alliance with the ASP. They wanted to restore the status quo from before the alliance. The People's Revolutionary Space Program gained widespread support from across SSP territory, with many of those against the alliance joining their movement. Large swaths of land and sections of the military were now under the control of the PRSP. The revolution against the SSP had begun, and with it, the first major conflict in ClanHub.